award, the highest awards Indian Academy of Pediatrics in the year 2010, and ISC Win Medicare Plan Recession Award 2009, India Society of AstraZeneca Oration in 2010, Olympus Mitra Endoscopy Award by ISG. He has total awards about 95, publication, peer-reviewed journal about 203, book chapter of 30, invited lecturers, editorial board of member of National International Journal, task force member of the national body. Ladies and gentlemen, we have the two doyens as a matter of fact, and we like to learn from them how best we can able to learn each other to save our liver and how the environment contributing this factor we like to learn. Over to our chairman to take over, sir, and take the topic.
Thank you, Dr. Patil, Dr. Satish, Dr. Srinivasan, Dr. H. Paramesh, and my respected teacher come colleague, Dr. Naresh Bhatt. It is not nothing new about him. He's a brilliant mind of gastroenterology. He has been on the chairs, highest chairs of gastroenterology in this country. And there are no words to express his excellence in the field of gastroenterology and hepatology. With these words, I would like to invite Dr. Naresh to kindly deliver his talk.
Thank you, Surinder. It's a privilege to be invited by such an eminent body and to have such distinguished people in the audience. Especially, I owe a lot to Dr. Paramesh, my initial mentor, when I came back to Bangalore in 1986, and the first to stretch out a hand of support and help me in my formative years was Dr. Paramesh, and he's continued to do this over the last 35 plus years. Thank you, sir, for your continued blessings and support to a lot of youngsters like me. It's again a pleasure to have Dr. Surinder Yacha chairing this session. Surinder and me go back to the early 80s in Chandigarh, when he was in the Department of Pediatrics and then into pediatric gastroenterology, and then climbed several steps to move over to the SGPGI Lucknow, where he founded the department. And when he left, almost about 30 years later, that department was at its peak as a leader of pediatric gastroenterology in this part of the world. With this, let me come on to the subject proper about the environmental effects on the liver and what can we do about it. All of us know that liver is one of the biggest organs in our body, situated in the abdomen. And what it does is it gets a lot of blood supply from the gut. So all that we have eaten, metabolized, and then absorbed, finally reaches the liver. And then a lot of things happen in the liver, and then it goes into the systemic circulation. The liver also puts out bile, which contains many proteins, bile acids, and so on, and also is a conduit for getting out some waste products. It would be fair to say that the liver is the most complex organ in the body as compared to the heart, which largely is a pump, mechanical pump. The kidney, which is an efficient filter and takes care of toxic wastes. As compared to that, the liver has several functions. It is the chief site for protein synthesis in the body. It is the chief site for detoxification of all the things that come from the gut. It is involved in metabolism of several things, including glucose and fat, and is also a site for storage of micronutrients. So one can imagine that if such an important organ starts giving trouble, then we are going to have a big problem on our hand. As Dr. Parmesh mentioned, that liver disease can have multiple etiologies, starting with alcohol, which most of us are aware of. We have various viruses like the hepatitis A, B, C, D, E viruses. We have non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. We have metabolic diseases where there's excess of copper or iron. We have autoimmune disorders, and we have drugs and complementary medicines also, which can cause liver disease. The great news is that most liver disease is preventable. We have excellent vaccines for hepatitis A and B. We have fantastic drug therapy for hepatitis C, and we expect hepatitis C free world by 2030. In fact, in the last 3 years, actually, I don't remember having seen a case of hepatitis C. A clean water supply and sanitation can help us get rid of hepatitis A and E. And social action and dissemination of information regarding alcohol, NAFLD, and toxins can also make these liver diseases extinct from our medical world. I'm sure Dr. Parmesh would remember patients like this, the so-called Indian childhood cirrhosis, which we diagnosed often in the late 50s and in the 3 decades thereafter. It was an early onset fatal liver disease starting at the age of 1 and 2, and there was an excess amount of copper accumulation, and it led to death in these unfortunate children. It was hypothesized that this copper accumulation liver came from the use of cooking utensils which had copper. I'm sure Dr. Yacha has not seen a case for 30+ years like me, and we're happy to say that this disease perhaps no longer exists, at least in India. There are some reports of the West of cirrhosis like Indian childhood cirrhosis, but not quite the same. About 30-40 years ago, there was this outbreak of arsenic-related liver disease. And when the government started encouraging the development of tube wells and bore wells, the local people called it the devil's water, because they knew that this water was contaminated and caused disease. And there were several reports of arsenic-induced liver disease. And my own professor, Professor Datta, put out a paper on the non-cirrhotic portal fibrosis in North India. And there were similar articles from Bengal and now the present Bangladesh on this. Arsenic from the tube well water is a smaller problem now, but chemical waste from industry still puts out arsenic and is something that we still have to be aware about. The fungus aflatoxin, which we know can contaminate nuts like groundnuts, and it's a very well-known co-carcinogen. Once aflatoxin gets into the liver, it is metabolized and it becomes toxic, and it actually binds the DNA and causes mutation of the tumor suppressor gene leading to the development of liver cancer. This is yet another problem that is a scourge both in India and various parts of the world, including Africa. But I'm happy to share that it's not a major problem anymore. But what is new? What is new is something called drug-induced liver injury. Every time we come up with a new drug, it's quite likely that there is a 10 to 20% chance that that drug would cause some amount of liver injury, and the mechanisms of them are several. If you look at this list of drugs that I have put up here, includes drugs like paracetamol, it looks like drugs or antibiotics, anti-blood pressure medicines, painkillers, drugs for diabetes, drugs for heart disease, drugs for epilepsy, drugs for HIV. Now, all these are commonly used drugs, and all these drugs are known to cause liver disease. So while we have taken giant strides in pharmacotherapy, along with that has come an unpleasant problem of drug-induced liver injury. And believe me, it is not an easy task to try and find out which individual has his liver injury due to a drug, because they are often taking so many drugs, and most of us are not very conversant with the side effects of these drugs. A few years ago, we started seeing patients from Yemen, and they had a very peculiar liver disease that mimicked autoimmune hepatitis. As gastroenterologists, we know that autoimmune hepatitis is largely a disease of women. But here we would see this in male patients in the majority. Only then we realize that the people of Yemen are addicted to chewing this leaf called khat. And khat is an alkaloid which can cause serious liver disease. And some of these patients would reach us with fairly bad liver disease requiring transplantation. Once we are aware of this, we became even more aware that it was not just khat, but several other plant and herbal products which could cause liver disease. My good friend, Dr. A.B. Syriac from Cochin, has virtually taken it upon himself as a mission to bring about the toxic effects of herbal and natural treatments for liver health. And I've taken the liberty of sharing some of his slides. Is there actually a herbal therapy for liver disease? And if it is it safe? Most allopathic drugs go through a systematic protocol of testing, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4 testing, right from animal experiments to post-marketing surveillance. But unfortunately, herbal drugs and supplements, for the most part, are untested for benefit and safety. Almost all of them have advertised claims, but very little evidence supporting these claims. Why does it occur? It's because of the government's thrust on pushing our indigenous herbal therapy to the world, and they've given them some licenses to use this without the required testing protocols, and we shall see how these are deleterious to us. There are safe herbal drugs, no doubt about it. We all know about Phyllanthus neruri. In fact, Professor Barry Bulmler, in whose memory and his birthday we celebrate as World Hepatitis Day, actually went and patented Phyllanthus neruri because of the initial evidence that it was a good drug. Similarly, milk thistle or Silymarin is widely used. The unfortunate truth is, while both reduce some amount liver inflammation, but there has been no evidence to suggest that there is a change in clinical outcome or any clinical impact, and they perhaps serve very little other than being a placebo. But the bigger issue is that a lot of these drugs can be unsafe. I would say are unsafe. They can be unsafe, and they can be directly liver toxic. We've talked about green tea extracts. Giloy was in the news a few weeks back, widely used even in Bangalore. Aloe vera is, ubiquitous in all homes these days, and various other plant products like ashwagandha. There are enough reports. It's not moving. The herbal tea induced veno-occlusive disease. There have been studies in adults. There are several reports from India and various parts of the world. And we know that herbal teas can have disastrous consequences not only on the liver, but on the kidney as well. Here again is a list of various plant and food supplements which are used as health tonics, slimming aids, for menopausal symptoms and purgatives and so on, which can cause serious liver injury. So the problem is not just with the herbal drugs being potentially unsafe, but they can be indirectly toxic because a lot of them we see come with heavy metal contamination like lead, cadmium, arsenic, and mercury. They can be adulterated with chemotherapeutic agents, steroids, and so on. And poor manufacturing conditions can lead to contamination with pesticides and insecticides. So to this scientific community, our prayer is to put pressure on the government that yes, let us encourage the use of herbal therapy when it is useful, but let us also keep an open mind about its potential toxicity and also keep it under the same scrutiny and protocols that we have for allopathic drugs, because in our endeavor to do good, let us not do harm. I'm now moving on to a new area called non-alcoholic fatty liver disease and non-alcoholic steatohepatitis, which has reached global epidemic proportions. In fact, the prevalence of NAFLD is about 25% all over the world. What is this? We know that in alcoholic liver disease, there is accumulation of fat, and then the liver gets progressively damaged and leads to cirrhosis. Now, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease occurs in people who do not take toxic doses of alcohol or may not take any alcohol at all, but their livers accumulate fat and have a progressive liver disease, so much so that they may end up not only with cirrhosis, but even with liver cancer. We've been studying this disease for about 30 years now, and the initial data clearly showed a kind of a linear association between the prevalence of obesity and the prevalence of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. So the message was clear: obesity is associated with NAFLD, and if we have to tackle this, we need to tackle obesity. And if you look at the worldwide figures, red is more than 30% of the population, And India may have just won one silver medal in the Olympic Games, but here it ranks very high. It's on par with the US, lots of Europe and Australia. But this is nothing that we need to be proud about. I'm sure Surinder and Dr. Parmesh will agree when I say that it's no longer an adult phenomenon. And pediatric fatty liver disease is here to stay and is already making an impact not only in pediatric onset adult diseases, but diseases in the pediatric population itself. When we spoke about the role of obesity, the next thing that came up was what happens. And we realized that there's something called a metabolic syndrome, where you have obesity, you have high triglycerides and cholesterol, you have diabetes, and so on, high blood pressure, high uric acid. And central to that, we had this phenomenon called increased insulin resistance, which simply means that to achieve the same kind of metabolic effect or goal, the body requires much more insulin, and that leads to causing more fat in the liver and so on and so forth. While we spent about 2 decades on this business of obesity and talking to people of obesity, data came out telling us that non-obese people also get NAFLD. They called it the lean NAFLD. And why was this happening? We realize that people can have fat in around their hips and in the abdomen, which is subcutaneous, which can be bad, but not as bad as people who have this hidden fat with the viscera inside the abdomen, which is not so visible unless you do some special tests. So while fat people who have obviously have more fat evident in the subcutaneous tissue do have a risk, but the highest risk is those who have an increased visceral fat. And so the mantra changed from just obesity to visceral obesity, leading to insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes, increased lipids, hypertension, and NAFLD. And that entire spectrum has widened to not only include disorders like PCOS or polycystic ovarian disease, to neurological disorders like dementia, increased cardiovascular risk, stroke, diabetes, and NASH. But remember, it also can lead to a prothrombotic state, it can lead to inflammation, and so on and so forth. So what we are left with is this business of visceral obesity leads to increased insulin resistance and a metabolic syndrome and a cascade of events, not just in the liver, but in almost every single organ. It will surprise you if I say that obesity is linked to cancer. Whether it is cancer of the head and neck, esophagus, pancreas, kidney, colon, or whether it's the breast, endometrium, or whatever, there is a direct link to obesity. In fact, 40% of all new cancers are related to obesity. And the other fact is also true, is that if there is one factor which is common to most cancers, it is not smoking, it is obesity. And so this is something that we need to fight with all our might. So if you look at preventable cancers, while smoking is there right on top, obesity is fast climbing And I'm sure in the next 20 years, we'll find that obesity outranks smoking as a cause of cancer. And hence, if you look at the causes of death in NAFLD, it is not liver disease that's on top. It's cardiovascular disease. That is, your strokes and heart attacks are major causes of death. Non-liver cancer. Liver cancer is obviously there, but non-liver cancer is the second most common cause of death in patients with non-alcoholic fatty liver. So what does it tell us? It tells us that while we may be talking about excess fat in the liver, the consequences are across organs in the body, and in fact, maybe even more serious consequences outside the liver than in the liver. So when we talk about prevention, we always look at what are the factors, genetic factors. We know that we can't choose our parents. Yes, there are epigenetics that occur, which we can talk about, but the environmental factors become of prime importance when we are trying to make changes to change the natural history of these disorders. As I said, we spoke about fat. And for decades, even I was guilty about talking about saturated fat to all my patients. Only now we realize that this mantra that saturated fat must be removed has actually not given us much benefit and perhaps has paradoxically increased our cardiovascular risks. Prospective studies have shown no significant association between saturated fat intake and cardiovascular risk. But what becomes more important is not just the fat, but carbohydrates. Because we realize that the carbohydrates that we ingest gets converted to fat inside the body. So lipogenesis or fat production can occur from carbohydrate sources. And hence, we have shifted our aim from cutting down the fat to cutting down calories and carbohydrates. So unsaturated fats are healthy, which we see in fish, nuts, and seeds. Saturated fats and butter, cheese, coconut oil is okay in moderate amounts. But the fat that's bad is the one that comes from processed foods, from deep fried fruits and packaged goods. And those trans fats have been steadily declining in most recommended diets and is now taboo across the world. And I'm sure most of us have realized this and made changes in our own diets. So while unsaturated fats are okay, saturated fats, small quantity is all right, but always include a lot of color in your diet, which comes from your fruits and vegetables and whole grains, which can compensate, give you some amount of good calories and good protein and cut down the bad fat. Now, where are these calories coming from? We find the younger generation who have now become adults or even reached their 40s and 50s have been thriving on sugary drinks and juices in their childhood and continuing it to this day. And this fructose and sucrose not only is a major source of calories, but it can, as I said, be converted to fat inside the liver, leading to NAFLD, so it's called lipogenesis. And it can also give rise to increased triglycerides and cholesterol, it can give rise to uric acid and also diabetes, of course, other than glorifying your figure by making you rotund. So what do we know about NAFLD so far? We know that it is something that can cause bad liver disease, which can progress. We have spoken of obesity and the new concept of visceral obesity. We have spoken about dietary fat and calories. Now I'm going to introduce a new villain, a new dimension in this entire story, and that is an inside job. And that inside job, my friends, is the gut microbiota. We know that the gut microbiota is responsible for an intestinal barrier which is strong and doesn't allow things to go across the barrier which are toxic. It helps us in an appropriate immune stimulation. It enriches host metabolic functions and so on and so forth. And once there is a dysbiosis, this environment there in the gut changes, it can lead to increased intestinal permeability or the so-called leaky gut, disruption of immune tolerance, and various things, including carcinogenesis. So now the plot thickens and we have the gut microbiota, which is walked in to complicate the situation. This is a very interesting study that came out almost 20 years ago, where they looked at the gut microbiota in a poor population in Africa, in Burkina Faso. And they looked at the microbiota in Italy. And they found, if you just look at the colors, don't worry about the names, that the colors are totally different, which tells you that what you eat decides on what your microbiome is. And therefore, if we think that the microbiome has such an important role to play, then obviously what we eat is influencing a lot of disease conditions. And we realize that the microbiome not only produces vitamins like B12, folate, and short-chain fatty acids, but it also produces immunomodulants, which can be good or bad. They can be pro-inflammatory or anti-inflammatory. So microbes in the gut have a very important role to play. So it's not just the food, but also the microbial products that are important. So now when we look at our fructose and sucrose, we now realize that it's not just about the meal and the calories that it is pushing in, but also what is happening to the microbiome, what is it doing to the intestinal permeability, and how it is pushing in various toxic compounds which is causing inflammation and fibrosis in the liver. So it's not just what you eat, but your gut that is also adding to the problem. And when we realize that this dysbiosis and bacterial translocation and bacterial products that reach the liver cause a lot of changes inside, including fibrogenesis, cytokine production, and so on. But remember, it is also going outside the liver. So the inflammation is not just in the liver, but beyond the liver as well. So systemic inflammation is something that is fueling a lot of cardiovascular risk. We know that inflammation is a very important factor in atherogenesis. So look at how the gut and the food that we eat is not only affecting liver, but even the heart and the brain and the vascular system. So coming back to how we can do good is to eat a pro or anti-inflammatory diet, cut out the pro-inflammatory diet. And so, as I said, a lot of colors, more vegetables, fruits, whole grains, as against cutting down refined grains, processed and red meat, sugary food, and drinks. And that needs to be brought down to a large extent. Of course, the next factor in NAFLD is the role of exercise. And what does exercise do? It increases peripheral insulin sensitivity. It decreases the de novo lipogenesis and so on and so forth. So not only does it improve your cardiac function, but it also has effects on the liver and cuts down liver fat. And this benefit can come both with aerobic as well as resistant training. And you can see that there are elegant studies which have actually looked at this in diabetic subjects, and it shows that you can decrease the fat inside the liver with exercise. And what do? We recommend a weight loss of about 7 to 10% in these patients. You restrict the calories substantially and eliminate these pro-inflammatory foods and refined foods in the diet. And that helps us to see definite changes in the liver histology and decrease in fat and even the outcomes. So far, we know about NAFL, nose liver disease, we know about visceral obesity, dietary fat and calories, and the microbiome. Now comes the role of something that perhaps a lot of you would never have thought: sleep and the circadian rhythm. We know that sleep deprivation is not only gives you a bad day, the next day, you're in a foul mood, you argue with everyone, fight with everyone, and so on and so forth. But what we don't know, that it also causes increased fatigue. It increases certain things like ghrelin, leptin, and orexin, which ultimately lead to increased appetite and food intake and fuel obesity. It also changes things on the cortisol and sympathetic activity, leading to glucose intolerance and a metabolic syndrome. So sleep is not just about shutting your eyes and getting up next morning. It has a lot of effects on the rest of the body. And in fact, look at this interesting work. They've actually looked at people who worked in shifts, and they find that this is an independent risk factor in the development of obesity. It was also proportional to the total lifetime duration of shift work. People who tended to work in these shifts, for long periods of time, several years, they tended to have more of this effect. And even if you did a short time study just for 8 days, and you sort of mimicked a shift work pattern of sleep and feeding, their glucose levels went up. Now, friends, just think of the millions of young people in our own country who are working in shifts catering to businesses in Australia, Europe, and America, and look at the amount of health risk that we are subjecting them. And believe me, no one cares, because we don't know. And yes, they are earning money. But I think somewhere along, as scientists, we need to put pressure and make people aware that these are real risks and that this needs to be addressed. I'm also now moving to an interesting thing of social jet lag. In the good old days, business meetings were held in the morning and you did your office work in the afternoon. Now people work through the day and have business meetings in the evening. Business meetings are over dinner and cocktails. And this is what is called the social jet lag. And even this social jet lag increases the risk of metabolic syndrome and the risk profile of cardiovascular diseases and so on. So it's not just working shifts, but we pushing ourselves in this so-called social jet lag as being a part of our culture is also not a great thing. So all of you are aware of the general tips for having a healthy sleep hygiene. Go to bed and wake up at the same time. Avoid coffee and caffeine later in the day. Expose yourself to bright light in the morning so that your biological clock gets activated. Develop a relaxing routine. Reserve your bedroom only to sleep. No TV, no phones or video games in your bedroom. If you have to listen to Arnab or any other news channel, do it well and early in the evening rather than at 10 o'clock in the night. And all the TV serials should, I think, be seen early in the evening rather than at bedtime. Finally, the risks of industrialization. Our industries are putting out a lot of chemicals. We have a lot of bio waste that is coming out. We have all these electronic industries putting out waste, not trying to recycle them. And I purposely made this slide something that you can't read, because there's so many things, right from selenium to lead to polyvinyl chloride to polychlorinated phenols, trichloroethylene, arsenic, and so on and so forth. What are we doing about this risk? Because this risk is real and is true, and not many of us are really focusing on it. We need to address it, and we need to address it early. This gastroenterologist has devoted most of his life to environmental causes, Professor Cave, and his postulate is that these polyfluoro compounds, which come from industries like the Teflon industry, polyvinyl chloride, and so on, they are polluting the environment and going in your water supply and affecting babies in utero and leading to an altered hepatic metabolism. And this is fueling childhood liver disease. So childhood liver disease is not starting after the child is born, but is starting in the womb of the pregnant mother. And why is this? Because of our carelessness and how we are not handling the environment better. While we have science now providing us a window of opportunity of manipulating the microbiome from one that is of a disease state to getting that of a healthy state to sort of cut down a lot of diseases, we are virtually changing the internal milieu. Unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, this window of opportunity is going to be available to us only at least a decade from now and not in the near future. Great thing to talk about, great opportunity to talk about, but unfortunately not in the realm of clinical medicine at the moment. However, the immediate options are there for us to see, right from our energy drinks to nutrition to environment, toxins, processed food, alcohol, medicines, etc., etc., etc. These are things that we can certainly manipulate and certainly take advantage of the beneficial effects of cutting down these from our environment. So to reiterate, most liver disease is preventable. Vaccines, drug therapy, clean water supply, decrease amount of alcohol to acceptable levels, fight NAFLD by fighting obesity and good diets, look at toxins, both industrial and plant sources, manage and contain the obesity epidemic, and good management of diabetes will all go a long way in preventing liver disease. To summarize, while most liver diseases are preventable, the two prime players are the gut and the liver. Diet, exercise, and good sleep rhythm are the pillars of management. Manipulation of the microbiome in the gut is the next frontier, and the benefits extend beyond the liver to the cardiovascular system, cancer, and including prevention of dementia. I'll stop here, and thank you, Dr. Parmesh, for this opportunity.
Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Naresh, for a wonderful, wonderful lecture and the multi-dimensional aspects of environmental effect on the liver. And to summarize briefly, he talked about the toxins which are from metals, particularly copper, affecting the liver, causing Indian childhood cirrhosis. Arsenic causing non-cirrhotic portal fibrosis is one of the important causes of portal hypertension in adults as well as in young adults. Aflatoxin, which come from dietary products like corn and also the groundnuts. He also talked about the drug-induced liver injury, which is a major thing because he thought that the diagnosis of PH is very tough. At times we cannot differentiate among the causes which can produce drug-induced liver injury and other causes. He talked about the herbal therapy. A lot of people get actually lured by the advertisement, over-the-counter products, and I feel that he has very clearly given you the message that unless we have a scientific evidence, as we have for the allopathic medicine, herbal products could not be are not really safe for our use in life. Second thing, he talked about the alcoholic side liver disease in India. I think he also showed you the map. It is full to the brim that alcoholic liver disease, and it is causing increasing in this country, not only in adults, but also in children. Bangalore is full of obesity. I'm seeing day in and out in Bangalore children with obesity and affecting different organs of the body. He talked about the fat, which he actually summarized and said, not important is the fat, excepting trans fat, but carbohydrate reduction is important, and also the fructose containing, which are sugary feeds, sugary marketed drinks that are also causing havoc in the country. Gut microbiota, this is a very important now. It is considered to be a different organ, an independent organ of the body. Microbiomes are producing a lot of disorders which are not only affecting the
We can't hear you, Surinder.
I think he's hung up.
Hello.
Mostly ಅವ್ರದ್ದೇನೋ freeze ಆಗಿದೆ ಅನ್ಸುತ್ತೆ.
Network issues.
just wait, hold on.
Okay.
So, other impact is prevention of actually this unhealthy liver problems are lie in the diet restrictions and also in the exercise. Good sleep is very important for health, and social jet lag is also playing a role which we should avoid. And industrialization is not in fact in our hands, it is in the hands of the government. We can take action on this, and we should actually emphasize on this aspect. So this is a very good and a very nice talk, and a lot of things can be done by us own.
Okay.
But some questions from the people.
Yes.
Any questions?
Hi, sir. I'm Dr. Ravi here. Hello, Dr.
Yes.
Naresh Bhatt.
Hi, Ravi.
It's a pleasure to meet you here. We both bump into each other in the hospital. I just want to say, sir, because last 1 year, I think the Ayurvedic, Kashaya, all these things has made the maximum business. Whoever were in that business have made probably millions. So have you seen any increase in the cases or any gastrointestinal problems?
Yeah, we have. I mean, it is, though I have put those slides as AB Series, across India, we are seeing products related to this.
Okay.
So I think there is a increase in this. While I'm personally not against herbal products, but I think they should be scrutinized and subject to audit like any other medication.
Medicine. Correct. Thank you, sir. Thank
We Dr. Ravi, I would
Yes,
like
sir.
to add one more thing that there are a lot of disorders. In fact, if we see liver disorders in children in particular, because I deal with the children, 60% of them, we don't have the etiology, the cause of the liver disease. What Dr. Bhatt also said, that we find liver disease just only day 1 or day 2 of life. And in utero, that is what he said. In utero, you may have disease actually and manifesting as the child is born. And there are other gastrointestinal problems which are unidentified. We don't know how much it is contributed by herbal medicine, how much is contributed by pollutants, pesticides, and many other things which can contribute. And at times we are at a loss. What is the cause of this, despite intensive search for the etiology of the disorders? So a lot of disorders are there which we don't know actually how much is environment causing the problem.
Thank you, sir.
Dr. Bhatt, is this khat, what you said, Yemen, is it available here? Is it available in India? Khat?
No, khat is not available in India, fortunately.
Oh, that's good. Right.
I think Dr. Yashwant Patil has a question. Dr. Yashwant Patil is in US at the moment. Sir, please go ahead, sir. Sir,
You have to unmute yourself, sir.
Unmute, sir. Unmute, sir.
Sorry.
Thank you, sir.
It was Naresh sir, it was a wonderful lecture and we have learned a lot of things from your lecture. And from the closing remarks by Yacha sir, he is again second boss in gastroenterology, we know, since years together. And whatever we have contributed, it was excellent for all actually. What we are doing up till now, so many mistakes. Nobody knows what will happen with this Ayurvedic medicines, what will happen with this kadha also. Now in these Corona days, many people must have taken kadha daily for months together.
Right.
We don't know what about their liver condition. Then one question is there that lot of sugar is eaten nowadays, that is white sugar, which contains sulfur, which damages your body at every level. So why not to promote in place of sugar, jaggery? What is your comment, sir, about that?
Absolutely. I think anything which is natural and less processed would be beneficial is thing. And I think people in positions like you who can influence policymakers, I think you should be making these statements, going to the press and activate and stimulate a movement across, not just India, but across the world, that we make these changes. Only then will we be able to make a difference for the next generation and the generation after that.
Okay, sir. So my advice is that just to have some small tips on this only. Just enumerate those tips that we can publish and we can give into the daily newspapers for the public knowledge. I think that will be better. I request Paramesh sir to take tips from Naresh sir so that we can publish in our journal also.
Another thing regarding this kadha, I saw a lot of children who had consumed it and they were actually presenting with gastritis, nausea, vomiting, GI upsets, and we had to get them to stop it so that you don't develop these problems. So this is a havoc which is created by the fast foods. A big havoc. We are finding a lot of constipation. It's a rise in India, a rise in Bangalore itself. Throughout India, we have constipation. Pain abdomen explained in children. We don't know the reasons for this. We find a lot of allergies occurring. And this what's called the fast food is the taste of the modern time for children and adults. And this is creating havoc. Really, we need a big awareness on this fact. Doctors alone cannot do it. It has to come through press and through advertising agencies because we cannot match the advertising agencies. How many doctors can talk about this to individual patients? It has to be a mass campaign actually at different levels.
Doctors, no one listens to doctors. Everything doctors have vested interest. So I think it has to be the statements that from the non-medical fraternity.
Yeah.
That's like Mark Zuckerberg has to say that, sir. Any other questions from attendees? We have a very long list of attendees. Anybody wants to ask a question, please?
Yeah, good
Parmesh,
evening.
Parmesh.
My name is Saumitri Ranganathan, and I'm from the Divecha Center for Climate Change. It was a wonderful lecture. Thank you, sir. I just have one small request from your end. We are now actually connecting with the social media, and Divecha Center is putting up all tweets on different platforms. So if you could just give us like a short write-up about things that could be incorporated and things that are actually hurting the humanity by way of environmental changes, and that would be very welcome, and it would be the right thing for us to put up from our department. So I would very much request you to kindly help with that.
Most certainly, it'll be a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Yes, I have two anecdotes to quote since we have time. One is 2000 and I think 1997. We invited Professor Bloomberg, hepatitis D vaccine.
Oh, yes, yes.
Yes, he came to Bangalore. He addressed at Lakeside all the faculty. He was staying in the Institute of Science guest house only. And in the evening, we had dinner at the golf club. Other incident, I quote that. While traveling, he said, Dr. Parmesh, if in Bangalore people, if they change the water supply and sewage were separately, because your pipes are crossed one another. When the water is not flowing 24 hours, negative pressure sucks all the waste from the sewerage. And it causes a lot of problems. 50% disease India can be solved if you separate the pipelines. That quote unquote, I'll never forget it. And golf club, he said, why I organized in a hotel. Why you wanted a golf club? He said, Parmesh, one of a contemporary was a member of, I want to see what sort of club. Bangalore Golf Club, the first golf club in India, as a matter, quite functional. And his colleague was none other than Sir Ronald Ross, who found out the malaria parasite. He was a member of it. He enjoyed that one as a matter. Those are all the other one. Second incident, anecdote, I visited in Bhutan. The chief of pediatrics there were trained in Bangalore. He invited me. I went there. I made a grand rounds where one of the ward were only big bellies, children with adults and all this thing. I said, why this many cirrhosis? We hardly see in Bangalore anymore. Why it is? Sir, in southeast part of Bhutan, at the age of 1 year, they offer the alcohol for every children. That is their culture. These are all social, we have to educate these. These are all the two things. We can avoid the liver disease, those things.
Parmesh, incidentally,
Yes.
Bhutan is supposed to have one of the highest happiness index in the world.
Exactly.
Is that the reason?
That's what I was about to ask.
Happiness index.
So, any other questions? And I like to share with you, gentlemen, Naresh Bhatt, he's just getting over the COVID-19. He had it. 2 weeks ago, he was not too sure whether he could be able to address and all those things. I'm feeling 90% weak, Parmesh. And when I said that, all right, you take it around, we'll wait for it, your talk. We don't want this topic, nobody else, you will wait for it. Within 48 hours, Parmesh, I'm 95% better. I will come there. And look at this, their commitment for a cause. The greatest thing ever appreciated. This is what we need, people with academics, with a commitment for a social cause.
Right.
Our grateful Naresh for his
Dr.
talk.
Parmesh is here. I might as also tell you some stories about my times. When I came in '86, I was, I'm still one of those red hot guys, little low on my temper. And Parmesh has seen a lot of that. But to his credit, he always supported me with whatever I did. And at no stage did he ever say, no, you should change. He led by example, and over a period of time, he realized that that was the way that we should do our things.